legal to read a picture book on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and the other social platforms? Let's talk to everybody's favorite IP and entertainment lawyer, Tony, to find out more.
My name is Tony Iliakostas. I'm an adjunct professor of entertainment law and IP at New York Law School, and I have an Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok account called The IP Professor that is dedicated to all things intellectual property.
Tony, we've done episodes on whether or not people can read books on YouTube, record them, put them on the internet, read them in public, but we had specific questions about picture books. So are people legally allowed to read picture books on YouTube, in videos on social media, in public, etc.?
The answer is going to be no, unless, of course, obviously there's the caveat, unless you have gotten a public performance license or some other type of permission from the author or the publisher to read that book in a public setting. And let's go back to what we've talked about when we were discussing reading books in a public forum, like a social media channel, like even, let's say, an event at a library or any other sort of public event. When any book is written, there obviously it becomes immediately protected under copyright law. And there are rights that vest immediately with that specific copyright owner. And there are 6 that are enumerated in the Copyright Act of 1976, 17 U.S.C. 106. They vary from the reproduction right, meaning the ability to reproduce that work of authorship in multiple forms, the derivative work right, meaning the right to create derivative works based on that original work. And then you have kind of like the money shot, which is the public performance right, the public display right. All of those are, I think those two in particular are going to be the most important to a scenario like this. And even more broadly, when you're talking about reading any book, because public performance and public display, but let's talk more specifically about public performance. Public performance involves the use of displaying, or not necessarily displaying, but the act of making it known to a public audience beyond, let's say, an immediate family circle, meaning a lot of people, and it could be as many as 10 people. It could even be something as many as 5 people if they're total strangers and you're doing it in public. All that say, the public recitation of any copyrighted work in some type of fashion, or the public performance of any copyrighted work in some fashion, that is what triggers that public performance right. And you have to ask yourself, where in the public am I doing this? How many people is this going to? And also, how widespread is this going to be? And that even gets to the point of, like, let's say if you're reading this at a library event in a more of like a closed door event, is that being recorded and then uploaded onto YouTube? So that's why getting some type of permission to read a book in public is important. And I highly advocate anybody that is making a living off of that on YouTube, on social media, or even does this for a living. If part of your business or your brand identity is to read books in public, you have to make sure that you're contacting the publishers involved in these books to get that necessary permission to read these books aloud in a public setting. Now, taking this further to the context of picture books, it's even more important to get permissions, because not only are you reading the books, you're showing the pictures. And the pictures are a new and independent copyright that are obviously lumped into the broad copyright of the book itself. But in addition to the words, which on their own 2 feet are a copyright, you're also talking about the pictures. So think about, let's say, Shel Silverstein, where The Giving Tree. The drawings in The Giving Tree could on their own have artistic merit because they meet the criteria for being a copyrighted work. Same thing with even Eric Carle books. The way his illustrations have always been kind of like, very like different patterns, and they kind of look like kind of like scrapbook style illustrations. All of that, again, on its own 2 feet, could be its own copyright that is separate and apart from the book. So when you are talking about reading a picture book, your permission to the publisher is not only, hey, can I read this book aloud, but it's also, can I show the picture in this specific public fashion? And that permission would be even more so needed when you're talking about, showing it on social media, and you're talking about it on a social media channel, or showcasing it to the public in some other type of setting. That's where that permission would be essential. And I'm going to say it right now, because I know it's going to come. I'm Nostradamus here, and I know this is going to be the comments. There will be people that will say, oh, well, if I'm reading the book and then I show the picture in the context of the book, Isn't that a fair use? And to that, I'm going to nip it in the bud because that is not fair use. Fair use operates as a defense to copyright infringement so long as, heavy emphasis on that, so long as you are using that original copyrighted work for criticism, commentary, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, research. If you are not doing it for any of those reasons, like the good old Monopoly game, community chess card says, do not pass go, do not collect $200. And if you are using it for criticism, commentary, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, or research, there's a 4-factor test that is used under the Fair Use Doctrine. It's all laid out in the Copyright Act of 1976 that lays out what is the nature of the copyrighted work? What is the purpose and character of the use? How much of the copyrighted material are you using in proportion to the whole? And would the copyright owner suffer harm out of your use of their copyrighted work? Those are all the factors that are essential to the analysis of fair use. You don't need to satisfy all the factors, but it's certain one factor could carry enough potency to move the needle one way or another in favor or against fair use. And I'm telling you right now, reading pages from an Eric Carle book and then saying, oh, look at the caterpillar, that's not a criticism or commentary. Trust me, okay? And go to any copyright attorney. If they tell you, oh, look at the caterpillar, if they tell you that that is commentary, then they literally need to reevaluate their legal education and their knowledge of copyright law. So don't go there with fair use. Do not do it. There is no fair use argument to be made in a scenario like this. If you ride or die off of reading picture books, go to a publisher, ask for the permission, and if they turn you away, find another picture book, contact another publisher, get those permissions, and do it until you can get finally an approval that then you can do it appropriately, legally, and safely on social media.
And one of the questions we get so often on this channel in response to these videos where we're talking about potentially recording and putting online different books and different things is, but it will get the author's sales. So from a legal perspective, what does that mean?
Okay, so I don't even know where to start, Cam. Let's start with the one that would upset me the most if I'm the author. You're reading the book on YouTube, on Instagram Live, on TikTok Live, all that. Okay, fine, you read the book. But you do realize that now, if let's say you have a pretty mass audience, they read the book together while they never had to buy a copy of the book. That means that said author, while they're getting this publicity, they're not getting any royalties off of the sale of their book. You really think that people are going to say, oh, wow, I really love that Eric Carle book. I'm going to go ahead and buy the book in Barnes & Noble? No, they're trying to save shelf space. They're not going to buy a book for the sake of just having it if they read it already. There's no incentive in doing something like that. Bottom line is it severely disadvantages an author because they're not getting any royalty revenue from what otherwise would be a normal sale of a book on an online marketplace like Amazon, in a physical marketplace like Barnes & Noble. It's something that now they're deprived of that profit, so they will suffer harm. And yeah, they are suffering harm because you may think they're giving them publicity, but at the end of the day, the author is probably going to turn around and say, hey, you know what? I really didn't appreciate you doing this because now what's happened is you've read my book without my permission. Now the author is on notice of this, and now they could go to their publisher and their legal team and say, you know what? Let's go after them for copyright infringement, for violating my public performance right under the Copyright Act of 1976. And if even said author has, let's say, a screen grab or even a video recording of this live recitation on a social media platform, that is easily their way of getting into a copyright infringement dispute with the reader of this book. So it doesn't look good any way you slice or dice it. And I think this is the caution to any readers out there that really make a living off of reading these books. They really, really need to think twice, because you have to think to yourself, if you were in this position where you wrote a book and you spent time, effort, and money working on that book, and someone ended up reading your book without your permission, how would you feel? And that's really where I would ask them, how would you feel if you feel like you've been severely disadvantaged, if you feel like you've been swindled, if you feel like you've been misappropriated in some way? Yeah, exactly. Then you understand how the other authors feel when you're reading their books. So this is just a cautionary tale for any readers out there. If you have any intent on reading any type of book, picture book, regular book, encyclopedia, whatever it is, contact the publisher, get those permissions, and you're good to go.
I think it's worth pointing out that I am a multi-time best-selling author. I know how long it takes to write a novel. I write them really fast, but most people take a long time. I know people who write picture books. You would think with just a couple sentences on each page, it would take a very short amount of time, but it doesn't every single time. Sometimes it's a very long process to refine it and find just the right structure for the content that you are creating. And then we have to think about the artists as well, who I promise you did not take 5 minutes to create the artwork of that novel. So what it boils down to is that you as a reader, we love that you want to represent the book, that you want to read it, that you want to introduce new people to it, but it's not your choice to make. You do have to go to the copyright holder, so the publisher or the author that you are wanting to work with, get their permission to make sure that they've given you their blessing to do that, so that you have the licensure to read it in a public capacity, so that you do not end up hurting the person that you are wanting to help. So you've got to make sure you're doing this the right way. It's also important to point out that on any social media platform, they require you to use non-copyrighted content. If you're doing something that is violating that copyright, you will have a strike against your account. That content will not be qualified to monetize. It will likely be taken down, and you very well could get yourself banned from the platform if you continue to do it. So please don't do things that can get yourself in trouble and hurt your monetization, because if you do it once and they catch you and they put a strike on your account and you do it again, you're gone for good and you're not going to be able to come back. So make sure you're doing this in a way that's going to actually help what you're doing and not hurt you in the long run, especially on the financial side of things. If you've got questions on this, go ahead and drop those down below. And as always, Tony's coming back for upcoming episodes to keep us legally protected in the publishing space. So drop your questions for us for those upcoming episodes. And you can reach out to Tony on his social media. Tony, where can everybody find you?
You can find me on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at The IP Professor. You can check out my entertainment law podcast called Unseen. New episodes drop every Friday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Drop your questions down below, because Tony's coming back to keep us legally protected in the publishing space. And we want to make sure that we are helping you to navigate the world of publishing, from your writing to your publishing to your marketing, to make this your easiest and most profitable year ever. We'll see you in the upcoming episodes.